This video is powered by the pros at Pascal Air Plumbing and Electric. Arkansas owned, Arkansas operated. GoPascal.com.
Saturday down south, and usually giving us his time on Mondays. We appreciate that. Connor, it was a wild Saturday in college football, and sometimes you say that just because it really was this past Saturday, and some outcomes nobody could have expected, and games that came down to the very end that maybe we didn't expect either. What'd you make out of the craziness from Saturday?
Well, Phil, I mean, I think I was one of the people banging the drum that by day's end, the Sun Belt was going to be the premier conference in college football. So, you know, I think there were certain things that were really predictable. Everybody knew that Georgia Southern was going to go into Nebraska and win. Everybody knew that Marshall was going to go into Notre Dame and win. I mean, heck, everybody knew that Appalachian State was going to go into Texas A&M and win. So I wouldn't really call it that wild for the Saturday. I think we saw all of these things coming, and, you know, some people, I guess, were a little bit surprised.
All right, I guess we got to start, you know, with at least one of these games here, and we'll hit on Arkansas for certain, but, you know, A&M, I mean, really, I mean, they got outpossessed 41 and a half minutes to just over 18, don't even reach 100 yards in passing. I mean, where to start with Texas A&M? App State's a good program, don't get me wrong, but, I mean, really? It's one of the most shocking final scores I think I've ever seen.
Where do we start? Well, I'm glad you asked. Let's start with the numbers here. Jimbo Fisher's making $9 million. They had 9 first downs in that football game. This is an A&M team that has 56 guys on its roster that are either 4- or 5-star recruits. App State has 1. This is a game in which App State earned $1.5 million to come into Kyle Field and win and embarrass Jimbo Fisher in year 5. If you're still of the belief that A&M is a top 25 team, I can't help you. You might just be brainwashed at this point. You might just truly have no idea. You might have drank some sort of Kool-Aid that I wasn't privy to, and you might be under some sort of spell.
Because it is called a cult. They call A&M a cult for a reason, right?
Look, everybody's got their own traditions. A&M, they do their thing. I think one of the things about college football that makes it great is that we can tell people from other countries just about these weird, random things that we do that are sacred on college football Saturday. So I won't push back too much on that. Yeah, it is a little bit out there. But I'll say this. If you're still expecting Jimbo Fisher to win a national championship at A&M, I think you need to look in the mirror and realize this is not a guy who has maximized talent in the last 6-7 years. He really has not. And this is now a time in which you should be building towards the future. You should be yearly top 10 finishes with those resources, that recruiting. And instead, with a year 5 coach who's making that kind of money, which has $86 million guaranteed left on it after this year, you're still at this place. And that is really, really troubling if you're an A&M fan.
Yeah, I mean, it's got to be. It's got to be. And yet they still, you know, they'll still say, you know, he's here to win a national championship and it's going to happen and all of that. And we can't help but just kind of chuckle at it. Kentucky beats Florida for the 3rd time in the last 5 years. So, I mean, at some point, we gotta appreciate now that Kentucky is just an overall better football program than Florida. And was the win over Utah like a smokescreen? Was it just kind of Utah might not necessarily be that good or coming across the country? Because, you know, that looked like a pretty good performance by Florida, but boy, did they lay an egg on Saturday against the Wildcats.
Well, I think two things can be true at the same time. Was Florida disappointing in that game against Kentucky? Absolutely. Anthony Richardson forced throws. It just was not there. How much of that was a byproduct of him getting hurt a little bit early on a low hit that he took in that game? I don't know. I thought Kentucky did some great things to confuse him, and I thought that front seven got after it. And any belief that that was a soft football team, as Roman Harper said, that was out the window by about the middle of the third quarter of that football game. So I think Florida came out and played really well against Utah, a Utah team that I had in the college football playoff. But what was going to be difficult no matter what was playing back-to-backs in this Florida heat in early September against those two teams. And Kentucky, Rick Scangarello deserves a ton of credit because they had negative rushing yards in the first quarter of that game. But he said, you know what? I'm going to stick with the ground game. And I'm going to trust that Florida, with the back-to-back that they have after playing 60 minutes against Utah, I'm going to trust that they're not going to be able to slow us down in the fourth quarter of the game. And then sure enough, That's exactly what happened. And they looked gassed. And Kentucky took over that game, and Florida didn't have anything left in the tank. And so everybody that was calling Anthony Richardson, Cam Newton, first of all, take a breath, take a lap, do whatever you need to do to get rid of that take, because that shouldn't be in your mouth. But if that was the takeaway from week one, the takeaway from week two should be Anthony Richardson is human. He is a guy that just started in his third career game, and he is working through some flaws right now, and Billy Napier's job is to figure out what those flaws are.
All right, so what do you make of Alabama and Texas? Is Alabama gettable? You know, I mean, I saw where they were the heaviest favorite to win a national championship in like 15 or 20 years. But after what happened against Texas, and they got to win, sure, so they're still undefeated. But, you know, offensive line might have looked a little suspect. What do you make of Alabama, and are they gettable now?
It felt very much like 2021, and everybody laughed at Nick Saban for going on with Cole Kubelik and Greg McElroy and saying that 2021 was a rebuilding year. What those people ignored was that Alabama was in a one-score game in SEC play 6 of 8 times. This felt very much like 2021. Alabama does not have, with this group, that ability to put their foot on the gas and just roll. That's because they don't have that ground game that they can really lean on in those spots. They have some capable backs. Do they have the interior offensive line? I don't think so. And when they commit 15 penalties in the first 3 quarters of a game, there's only so much that you can do. And by the way, they should have had more penalties because they got away with some face mask penalties, and they got away with some DPI in that game. But instead, you're having to trust Bryce Young to bail you out again. And fortunately for Alabama, there's no better player in college football to bail you out of a situation than Bryce Young. He has ice water in his veins. He made some unbelievable plays in those 2 scoring drives to be able to get Alabama out of Austin with a win. And I guess after a weekend like that, wherein the Sun Belt was the premier conference in college football, Alabama fans should just be grateful that they got out of Texas with a victory, because that easily could have gone the other way with a myriad of things that could have happened, mainly if Quinn Ewers had been able to stay on the field for all 4 quarters.
All right, now give me your thoughts on Arkansas. South Carolina, I mean, everybody knows Arkansas is going to try to run. Cincinnati couldn't stop them. Neither could South Carolina. I mean, Rocket Sanders is, I think, 4th in the country in rushing right now. The offensive line is opening a ton of holes. You got KJ running too. And this all without Dominique Johnson even dressing for the first 2 games. And a ton of playmakers on defense, of course, Drew Sanders leading that charge.
When I talked about Arkansas in the preseason, I said the reason I think they're the number 2 team in the SEC West and why I think they're the number 3 team in the SEC coming into this year is because I know who they are. And more importantly, Arkansas knows who Arkansas is. And when you get in these moments, we forget that this final score kind of skewed some things, but that's a 1-score game kind of late into the 4th quarter. But what does Arkansas trust? What do they trust against Cincinnati? They trust that ground game to be able to pick up those key first downs. They're not necessarily going to get outside of the system. You don't have to worry about KJ Jefferson going rogue and trying to make these heroic plays when he knows that he has a ground game he can trust, he has an offensive line he can trust, and when Kendall Briles is scheming like the way that he did on that touchdown to Xavier Thompson, wherein KJ kind of fakes the run and then you got that backside post. I mean, like that route is that's the exact reason why you have Kendall Briles in that spot. I continue to be impressed with Arkansas. I really do, and I think that the addition of Drew Sanders has been just monumental for them so far early in this year. I question what their upside is if Jalen Catalon's not going to be healthy, and that's kind of a TBD thing moving forward with the style that he plays, even if he does come back. But, I do think that Arkansas has set itself up well to be a contender in the SEC West, whether that means getting to Atlanta or not. I mean, TBD on that, but right now you got to be feeling good with the way that this team has come out in the first 2 games.
And the way that Drew Sanders played against South Carolina, had an absolutely phenomenal game. And Connor, it brings up the question, not only is Drew Sanders, I think, the best transfer that the Hogs got, but is he the best transfer in the SEC?
It's a little early. To say that. I think he's going to be in that discussion, though. I really do, and we'll see. I mean, I'm still optimistic that Tyler Harrell, the Louisville transfer, who has not been able to be on the field for Alabama these first 2 games, and that's kind of one of the issues that Alabama's still working through. They can't stretch the field. Post Jamison Williams era, they're really struggling with that. I still think he's going to be in that discussion. I think Tavion Robinson, the Kentucky receiver, is going to be in that discussion as well. There are a lot of other guys you could point to in the SEC. Who knows? Maybe Jackson Dart ends up being that if he's able to win the starting job at Ole Miss, which is still TBD. But Drew Sanders is definitely a guy that you're looking at saying, wow, that's a difference maker. Mm-hmm. That is exactly what Arkansas has needed. If he continues to get better in coverage, and I thought he was great in coverage in a game against South Carolina, then you are looking at a player who has first-team All-SEC upside. He absolutely does. And South Carolina really saw what he was capable of in that football game. Arkansas fans have got to be loving the addition that he's been able to provide so far through these first two games.
Mm-hmm. All right, Connor, let's talk about Scott Frost, the big news from the weekend, the things that happened off the field. And one of the best, I can't remember who tweeted this out, but I saw it when it comes up with all these different lists, different people that they think that could replace Scott Frost at Nebraska. Somebody had the thought of, instead of Nebraska starting to think of who's good enough for us when it comes to these candidates, are we good enough for them? I mean, that's the situation Nebraska has found themselves in when just by name you'd think, yeah, you're going to get the 1% of coaches, but in reality, you're not. So what level of coach and who do you think could be a good fit for Nebraska?
I think you have to make some people say no. And what I mean by that is it's okay to make these calls, and that's why you get out ahead of this if you're Trev Alberts, the AD. But you have to be willing to make those calls. You can't necessarily be afraid of rejection. Like when Hunter Yurachek goes after a hire, he's not afraid of rejection. Scott Woodward, he wasn't afraid that he got publicly rejected for jobs that he was offering at LSU. And I shouldn't say offering, but people that were being discussed for that job before Brian Kelly ultimately took it. And I think Matt Campbell makes a lot of sense. I think I have to make Mark Stoops say no. I think you have to kind of lean heavily on the whole basketball school thing that John Calipari threw out there and kind of test and see where he's at and throw $10 million at him per year because, in my opinion, he's one of the 10 to 15 best coaches in the sport and he'd be worth it. But those are the two guys that make a lot of sense. Dave Aranda, make him say no. I know there are a lot of people who are anti-Bill O'Brien, but Bill O'Brien is more respected within these circles than people kind of realize on the outside. He'd be a really interesting candidate, but Nebraska is not going to get to the place it's at in the mid-90s. It should aspire to be Iowa or Wisconsin. 8-9 wins, be relevant in some way, and have your place in college football. The sport has changed. Nebraska has too. They haven't beat a top-5 team in 20 years. I mean, let's be realistic about what this team has moving forward. I think that's kind of where the list would go. And then, you kind of work your way down the list of candidates after you make those guys say no.
Yeah, interesting. But it's exactly what happened at Arkansas. You're right about that. And so eventually you find the coach that wants you kind of more than you want him, or more than, I guess, like the fans would expect you to want him. A couple of games to ask about this next weekend. SEC teams, Mississippi State LSU is probably the best SEC game of the weekend. And Miami at A&M. Here it was, we thought like App State might be a tune-up for A&M to play Miami. Nope. It was a big fat hors d'oeuvre that they couldn't even swallow, and now they get the Hurricanes.
Yeah, and you get Kevin Steele, who has a reputation defensively in this conference with shutting down some pretty good offenses. And that's terrifying because they don't have an offensive identity to speak of at all. And that's really troubling for A&M in that matchup where you'd think, okay, well, you should be in a favorable spot. It's a year one head coach. And then you kind of see what they've done these first two games and you realize that is by no stretch of the imagination a gimme. Yeah, the Mississippi State LSU game is interesting because I got mocked in the offseason for saying that Mississippi State was going to go into Death Valley and beat Brian Kelly in year one. And if you watch Mississippi State these first two games, you're saying to yourself, that's a good football team right there. They fly around defensively. Zach Arnett's defense is legit. I mean, they are really, really improving there. And they're going from being just one of those teams that could defend the run well last year. They're the third best run defense in the SEC last year to now being a complete defense. 17 guys on that two deep that are in year three of the Zach Arnett defense. I mean, they're legit. I think they're going to go into LSU and win that game. And I think that Jaden Daniels is going to have a really difficult time getting first down, sustaining scoring drives, and that's going to be a tough pill for LSU fans to have to swallow, because I think Mississippi State's a better football team right now.
BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to wager on all your favorite sports, contests, and events with first-to-market odds and lines. Find reviews and news for every league, including Major League Baseball, NFL, NBA, NHL, combat sports, esports, and even golf. BetOnline continues to be the top online resource for all your sports information, from live in-game betting, props, and futures. Head to BetOnline today or use your mobile device to join today and make your first sports bet. Use our promo code BELIEVE50 to receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. That's BELIEVE, BLEAV 50. That's BELIEVE, BLEAV 50. Bet online, where the game starts.